Welcome to Critical Magic Theory, where we deconstruct the wizarding world of Harry Potter because loving something doesn't mean you can't be critical of it. I'm Professor Julian Wamble, and today we are talking about the one and only Ronald Weasley. Have you ever wondered why Ron's insecurities seemingly affect him a bit more than they do Harry and Hermione? Is Ron too normal for us to like, to want to redeem, to extend grace? And y'all, why is Ron one of the most divisive characters in these books? Today we are talking about all of it, and we have a very special guest who is, by her own admission, very much pro-Ron. And that's the energy that we need today, because some of y'all brought some very negative anti-Ron energy, and we need to cleanse the space. We need to hear from both sides. And so today we have with us our first ever guest. How auspicious. Dani Alexander. Everyone clap, and but not if you're driving. Dani, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Julian. I feel like I've been preparing my whole life to be on this episode today defending Ronald Weasley.
We're so glad that you're here, because I think that some of us really have a lot of thoughts, a lot of angst, a lot of emotions. But I want to make a very quick caveat before we really dive into things, because there are two different Rons within the fandom. Well, three, actually. There is book Ron, there is movie Ron, and then there's fan fiction Ron. We are going to focus most of our energies, and by most I mean almost exclusively, our energies on book Ron. So for those of us who have not read the books and know movie Ron, you're going to learn a few things today, because book Ron and movie Ron are not the same Ron.
Entirely different.
Just so different.
So different.
And so today we are going to be just enjoying ourselves in the world that is book Ron. But first, you know what we have to do, y'all? It's time to bop along to the theme song.
I've been looking forward to this. Can I say? I'm ready to bop.
If we're ready to bop along, we're ready to get it done. I might even just play it for you and me, Dani, so that we can just do it, and then we'll just, do editing magic. We need to talk about Harry Potter. Y'all, we're bopping.
Such a good bop.
It's such a good bop. Oh, wait. I have to make a couple caveats. This is important because I keep forgetting. We are going to split this episode into 2 episodes because
I talk a lot.
So do I. And so I want to make sure that everyone knows that we're going to split this into 2 episodes. And so for the first time, we'll have 1 episode this week and 1 episode next week, so that you can get the fullness that is Dani and I in our Ron Weasley glory. I say this in every episode, but I want to be very clear about it in this episode, because I know that many of us have very strong feelings about Ron, whether they be in the positive or in the negative. Dani and I are voicing our own individual views when it comes to one Ron Bilious Weasley. We are not asking you to walk away adopting what we believe. We are not asking you to change what you believe. We are simply asking that you think deeper, and if that deep thinking brings you to a place that feels more solid and firm in what you believed when you started listening, amazing. If it changes a little bit, that's also okay. But you don't need to think what we think. We want you to think what you think, just a little deeper. And that's what we are inviting you to do with this conversation that she and I are going to have. When we go through everything, never feel compelled to adopt what we believe. That's not critical thinking. That's something else. We are asking you simply to think deeper. And I'm excited to hear what that deep thinking brings out for you. I want to begin with our favorite Ron moment because I feel like there's going to be a lot of not so nice talk about Ron from some of the comments that we are going to dive into. And so I feel like it's nice to think about our favorite one. Dani, do you have one?
Just going through the list in my head, there's so many. Um, but I'm going to choose a controversial one. And
Ooh,
for me, it's when he returns after leaving the Horcrux hunt. Because that moment where we're listening to the Horcrux essentially air all of Ron's greatest fears, telling him he's worthless, telling him he's nothing. And Harry gets to see that um, without any nuance. It's just very blunt. Like, this is what your best friend has been going through. And then you see him recount the story of what happened when he left, how he worked his way back, and you hear that remorse and also what he learned from that mistake that he made. I think it's a powerful moment. I think it could have been better, but I think it represents Ron finally letting go of those fears and recognizing how misplaced they are. And it sets him up to then be able to go forward as a better person. I love that
I
moment.
love that. I love that because I think something I've not thought about in that moment is you realize how much Ron has internalized and how much has just kind of gone unspoken and how much is just kind of in him and he's been navigating in silence and without much provocation. And we do see it jump out in relatively unhealthy ways, but it makes sense when you think about it in those terms because he hasn't been dealing with it in healthy ways. And
Mhm.
so it would make sense that it would manifest in ways that are not healthy. Um, my favorite, or one of my favorite Ron moments, I just always love the moment where Ron gets to be in the spotlight because he always relishes it in a way that feels very kind of Julian coded in that it's very like hyping up the drama of it all and one particular moment for me is when Sirius Black kind of breaks into the boys' dormitory to get Scabbers and he goes to Ron's bed. And Ron's retelling of the story is just, I always laugh so
And it gets
hard.
like more intense, like more
So,
dramatic and
oh
more
my
dramatic
God.
every time.
It is so incredible, and I laugh so hard because, like, that's absolutely something that I would do,
Yeah.
which is like, I'm just gonna really milk this thing for all it's worth, and I think this is another one of these moments where we do get to see Ron's moment to be able to shine, and we really do get to see kind of what kind of celebrity he would be. And I just love that. And I love that he does get these moments and we get to
Mhm.
experience him as someone who is in the spotlight. And he eats it up and he should because it's such a rarity for him. And so yeah, I don't know. There's something about those moments that really just like hits for me.
I love it. Like whenever like he has a Quidditch win or anything like that, when he gets to be for a moment the center of
Right.
attention, it's so
Oh yeah.
rare for him and he loves it.
It is. And it's so funny because you also just get this sense that he has been preparing for this moment. Like, whatever
Yeah.
the moment is, he's been waiting and ready for it. And
He
so
practiced in the
there's never
mirror, like
literally, which is also very Julian coded.
very Danny coded too. Did I practice
Yeah.
this in the mirror? Maybe.
Oh, I did a lot of practicing. I was like, we have to make sure that there are some things that get done, which is so different than Harry, who kind of stumbles into these moments and is kind of like, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing. Ron's like, the script's in the bag. I'm ready to go. And I love that. I love it so much. It's time for us to talk about what words we believe best describe Ron. So the number one word was insecure, followed by loyal and jealous. Now, this is different than we've had in past episodes where the words have kind of coalesced in a certain way. This one feels a bit different because we've got kind of two words that are more negative and then one that's very positive and a good thing. And I find it very interesting that these words kind of rank themselves in this order. I mean, we can talk about all three, but I think the number one word being insecure is something that comes up for Ron a lot. And it's something that in a lot of the responses that we got in the survey, we got to see a lot of people really point to his insecurities. Some people were more forgiving of them and empathetic, and some of us were absolutely not. What do you think about that, Dani?
A lot of the comments did talk about his insecurity. And I think it is a defining aspect of who Ron is. And I think it's something that's very relatable to people, but where it may diverge from relatability is how we perceive how he dealt with it, how he internalized it, or how we perceive the validity of his insecurity. Because I think some people think he's just insecure because he's not as popular as Harry
Mm-hmm.
or doesn't get enough attention, which can seem very shallow. But as you examine his character and where
Mm-hmm.
he comes from, I think it's just so deeply rooted in his sense of self-worth because of his ranking in his family, because of his ranking, how he walks into a room, red hair, hand-me-down clothes, people already have an assumption about him. So he's extremely aware of how he's perceived and where he stands in relation to those around him. And I think that could be very degrading as a person to carry all the time.
And this doesn't come from nowhere. I think your point about the fact that he talks about where he's situated in his family is a really important point, because I think what we've talked about a lot in past episodes is kind of how the ranking within the Weasleys plays a really big part in their characterization and who they are as people and how they behave. And I think what is true for Ron is that he experiences a lot of bullying, for lack of a better term, from Fred and George. And there are a lot of moments where he is kind of belittled and maligned by them.
Mm-hmm.
It's really then difficult to kind of find out who you are as a person. And any bit of self worth and self esteem that you may have is also being quashed by people who claim to love you and are in your family. What I find so interesting about Ron's insecurities is that he seemingly doesn't overcompensate for them. He just is insecure. You know, some people will be insecure and like work very hard to kind of overdo it, like Hermione, for
Yeah.
example, right? Like she overdoes it. Like she's like, I'm going to be the smartest person in this room and I'm going to make sure that everybody knows it, because she feels so insecure because she's muggle born and she's new to this world. And so she really kind of amps it up. And
Mm-hmm.
Ron, in most moments, I think, interestingly, and this came up in some of the responses, it's kind of just like, this is what you're gonna get, and I'm insecure, and this is me. And
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something about that that I find really interesting and endearing, actually.
I agree. You see that he does have ambitions. Like when he looks in the mirror of Erised, it's him getting praise, getting attention, having succeeded. He has a ministry job, a Quidditch cup. Like he's done all these things. But they are, and I think we'll get into this maybe later, but they are once again these more like surface level um, accomplishments that people can just look at and say, wow, that's an accomplished, successful, quality person. Like a society puts a high value on those things. And so he wants them so that he can be seen as high value. But at the end of the day, if we're going to say he overcompensates in anything, I would say he overcompensates in like how like ride or die he is for the people in his life. Like he's going to pick on them. He's going to be, have his little temper and his temper tantrums and his moods. But at the end of the day, he's going to stand up like that and say, you have to kill me first. And if that's not an overcompensation, I don't know what is. Like,
Especially at 13 years old in the face of a criminal man,
yes,
like the idea that you would just be like, and also it's important to note, with a broken leg.
with the broken leg, holding himself up on Harry's shoulder, saying, you're going to have to kill us first. And Hermione's like, be quiet, stop it. And he's like, did you hear me? You're going to have to kill us first. Like, please, little baby child.
Couldn't be me. Nope.
I'd be Hermione. Shut up. Shut up.
You shut your mouth right now. He is a criminal and
Yeah.
he has killed 13 people.
But side note, the movies gave that to Hermione. So once again, how Ron was
Of course.
destroyed by the movies.
I think to humanize Hermione more, they gave a lot of the more human aspects of Ron to her.
Mhm.
And so what we get in the books is not what we get in the movies rather is not necessarily as forgiving. And so we don't really get to see him be this kind of ride or die loyal person.
Yeah. Mhm. All we really see in the movies is his insecurity and his comic relief. Like, those are the 2 main things that you have as a takeaway from the movies, which is really unfortunate, I think.
Yeah. And I also think that that was a perfect dovetail into the second word of loyalty because I do think that Ron is someone who is extremely loyal. This is something that I think we see from Arthur, which is how loyal he is. And particularly when it comes to friendships, we see Arthur willing to break laws. We see Arthur willing to kind of move mountains to do things. And we see both Molly and Arthur kind of being very loyal to Dumbledore, for better or for worse, but loyalty nonetheless. And willing to again kind of lay their lives on the line in moments and situations where it's like completely unnecessary. And I think we see that kind of for most of the Weasley kids, like this is a trait that they have. You're right. I think we don't necessarily give Ron as much credit for his loyalty to Harry, especially in the face of his insecurity and in the face of the third word, right? His jealousy. And I think we would be remiss to not acknowledge, like, yeah, of course, Ron is jealous of Harry. I think
Mhm.
we know that to your point. When he looks in the mirror of Erised, he wants a lot of things, whether they be surface level or not. And he is best friends with a person who gets a lot of those things without much provocation and without much work.
Mhm.
And if you're an insecure person who is best friends with someone who basically taps into every single one of your insecurities, you're going to be jealous. It's just kind of the way that it works. And again, I think what will be a constant refrain is like Ron as a kid, who is the youngest boy in this very large family. And so I think like his jealousy and envy makes sense to me.
Yeah, I very much think it makes sense, for who he is, where he comes from, in a situation. One thing that stood out to me in the comments was someone said Ron continuously treated his friends poorly when they got more attention than him, which felt
Mm,
fairly reductive to me because we do see all these instances of Harry getting tons of attention. And, when he gets on the Quidditch team, Ron isn't mad. He's stoked for his best friend. He's in the stands cheering him on every game. He doesn't get upset when Harry's in the Daily Prophet or getting glad handed by ministry officials or getting preferential treatment. He's just like, yeah, checks out. Like, that's totally fine. I'm right here beside him. But even with the Goblet of Fire, a lot of people, and this was in a comment, and it like light bulbed for me. A lot of people think that he was jealous that Harry was getting attention in the Goblet of when he put his name in the Goblet of Fire and like getting glory. Because I think one of the things he says, like, oh, you just couldn't be out of the spotlight. But what the
yeah.
root of his anger and jealousy is that he thought he had this best friend who trusted him and would not do things without telling him. And so he felt excluded and disregarded, which goes back to his insecurity. So the jealousy displayed there
Hmm.
isn't because his best friend's getting attention. It's because his best friend didn't bring him in on the gag when he found a way to put his name in the Goblet of Fire.
And what's so interesting about that moment now that you put it in that frame is that, last episode I talked a lot about Fred and George really just having each other to bounce one another off, bounce things off of one another. And in this moment in particular, it seems like Ron really wanted to kind of him and Harry to be the Fred and George of it all, right? Like that, I think that that is what he kind of understood about what friendships look like. I mean, they're his older brothers, they're always together, and Ron and
Yep.
Harry in a lot of ways do embody a lot of that vibe. And so to see then Fred and George go and try to break the rules together and get their name in and be unsuccessful, and then to then see Harry put his name in, I'm putting up air quotes for those of you who can't see.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Can't see the air quotes we were doing.
I think it also, again, like does feed into this insecurity that he has because what is true for Ron, I think, and it's what's true for so many of us is that when we go into situations like we talked about earlier, like you practice, like you envision it, you imagine what it's going to look like, and then you try to execute it as close to that vision as you can. And I think Ron probably had an image of him and Harry like figuring out a way to get their name in the goblet together. And to find out that Harry was successful,
Mm-hmm.
air quotes again, undermined. I think it like really did shake him and spoke to a reality. I think you're totally right that this isn't it was about feeling betrayed.
Yes. It's like, who am I to you? When
Right.
you to me, or from the get go, Ron treats Harry like a brother, his partner in crime, there for everything. And this was an instant where, by all appearances,
Yeah.
Harry did not. And like, yes, you can make the argument, well, he didn't believe Harry when Harry said it wasn't him. But I mean, like, again, 14. And also, the circumstances were pretty exceptional. Like,
Well, and we're talking about someone who was raised in the magical world,
mhm,
who believes in the infallibility of magic and believes in all the rules and strictures and all the things that happen. So it stands to reason, again, when you couple that with the fact that, yes, he is 14 years old, there's very little reason as to why he shouldn't believe that somehow Harry had been able to bamboozle the goblet. Ron's mind doesn't immediately go to someone else has kind of put you in danger because he's
mhm,
brothers with Fred and George who always find the workaround. So the logic there actually does make sense. I think what's true for me when it comes to Ron is that I can completely understand his motivations. I just really detest his execution. But but that is what it is. He's 14 and many of us brought up, invited us to think back on our teenage years, which I reject.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want to do that.
I mean, that's such a huge thing. Not to derail now, we'll touch back on it. But I think over and over, especially with Ron, because he isn't the hero. He isn't the logical brightest witch of her age who's there to save the day with her book knowledge. Um, we get more of an opportunity to see him be a failure because he doesn't have something else glossy and shiny to detract us from it. He just is who he is. And honestly, I find that so painfully relatable.
And I think, and we will get into this a little bit later, but I think that this is the root of our problem with Ron, is that I think it's like in Mean Girls when they say like Damien is too almost too gay to function. I think that Ron is almost too normal to appreciate.
Yes, yes, he is too normal to appreciate. I co-sign that wholeheartedly.
Also, I just want to point out how proud I am that I was able to slip in a Mean Girls reference. So,
That, yes,
um,
10/10.
let's move on to the arithmancy lesson. I have been remiss in not pointing out how many people have done the survey. And so we're correcting that today, partially because we've also hit a milestone. We got 1,002 people to respond. So,
Wow.
which is
Our
nuts.
controversial, divisive baby boy Ron Weasley. Way to go.
Bringing in the people. We really just have to give him a round of applause. Thank you, Ron, for your service. Yeah, we've been working to 1,000, and I felt very strongly that Ron was going to be the person to bring that in for us. And true to form, he delivers. Weasley is our king. The first question that we have to look at is Ron Weasley a good person? About 66% of us said yes, about 19% said no, and about 16% said don't know. Ugh. These questions are hard, and people always get on my case because they're like, they lack nuance, and they do. I recognize that and appreciate that. I think what is true is that I don't care.
I
Because
think the lack of nuance invites people to not have a bias based on how the questions phrased,
yeah.
and also invites them to have to explore the nuance on their own. And I think we see that in the responses.
Dani, was there any comments in like reference to this question that stood out to you that you want to talk about?
Yes. So on the like more positive side,
Mhm.
the ones that stood out to me, it wasn't so much one response, but a thread that was common in a lot of the more negative responses. was that he is toxic and abusive. Yes, which were said a fair amount of times. And I also encounter this sort of framing in the online discourse, on TikTok, Instagram, things like that. Um, and while I think we could really dive into that as a whole nother can of worms, what stands out to me is it feels like a very dramatic overstatement of what we see on the page. We are assigning this very sinister and toxic motivation to behaviors that are extremely run of the mill, like don't even cause me to blink an eye when it comes to adolescents, learning how to deal with their emotions and the changing like social dynamics and dramas that they are truly experiencing for the first time. So that one really stood out to me because toxic and abusive are very strong, loaded words that I think are being used a bit flippantly and also doesn't give him the same grace and benefit of the doubt that we give to Harry or Hermione with their behaviors that could also, if taken to their extreme or employed by a fully functioning mature adult, be described as toxic or abusive. Was that too? Did I go off the rails? I don't know.
No. I think that it's so fascinating because I think that the biggest grace that we tend to extend most of the characters in these books, and it's one again that I get called out on all the time, is that like they're
Mhm.
kids. For me, I often have to remind myself of that because coming in and kind of thinking critically about these characters as an adult, I tend to do what a lot of the adult characters in these books do, which is really adultify them. And in doing so, hold them to account in ways that I think is not always as fair or as
Mhm.
generous as it could be. And I do think that Ron bears the brunt of that in a lot of ways, again, because he doesn't have a scar on his head to kind of give us a narrative about why he is the way that he is. And he's not, someone who is part of the lower caste within the magical world. And so he just, again, is like almost too normal to appreciate, and almost too normal to forgive. And the things that motivate him to behave the way that he does are so seemingly mundane
Mhm.
relative to Harry and Hermione.
Yeah.
It just feels like they are not motivations and they're not excuses at all. And so we just punish him for it in a way that I think is really fascinating. Someone wrote, listen, I'm sure everyone will come with receipts to fuel the hashtag Ron bashing, and I absolutely agree that he's got his moments. But at the end of the day, he's an imperfect child who grows into an imperfect teenager. Who among us wasn't insecure, ignorant, cough, pureblood upbringing, temperamental, or petty as a teenager? The boy is full of heart and capable of growth. We see his growth. He messes up and takes initiative to do better, even if it's clumsy, like buying a book to learn how to treat women. And I think this sums up so much of what we talked about so far, which is the idea that Ron is just a normal teenage boy.
Yeah, and that comment you mentioned really stood out to me too, um, because it does approach him with that nuance and grace of where he is, but also that he does have to be responsible for his growth. And I do think it is a weakness of the writing that we don't really get his ultimate like light bulb moment until the very last book, after he makes a huge, grave, impulsive decision to disapparate, and then he can't find his way back, and he gets caught by snatchers. Like he had to make that mistake and see what his worst behavior could lead to for him to be like, whoa, 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 I've got to work this out. But we never got to see it, what comes after that, except for a few things. Like in the battle, he thinks about the house elves, and Hermione is like, oh, to make them fight. And he's like, no, to get them to safety. Like you see that thoughtfulness and conscientiousness come out there. You also see throughout the last book these hilarious moments where Harry wants to gag because Ron is like putting his arm around Hermione to comfort her when she's sad and like shooting Harry a dirty look when he's like making Hermione feel like upset, like how dare you make her upset. So you see him trying, and that's all we can ask of people, especially at that age. So I think we see him take like little baby steps in the right direction, and then the series ends. So,
And I think what is true, particularly for boys, is that like we are not taught a lot of things. We're forgiven for a lot of things.
very true.
But in terms of teaching us how to navigate our own emotions, our own insecurities, our own anything, really, the tool that we're given is externalize, blame everyone else but yourself. And we see Ron exhibit that a lot. We see Harry turn inward, but I think that that's the kind
Yep.
of byproduct of abuse. I think we
Yes.
see Hermione do both.
Yeah. She lashes out and she
Yeah, kind of brings it all in.
represses
But I
it.
think
Yeah.
that that is also something that we know that a lot of young girls are socialized to do, right? Like like especially the latter.
Mhm.
The theme that we're coming up with is that Ron is really just embodying a lot of what we see in the real world. And I think we'll talk a little later about like what that means for us as a fandom and the way that we perceive him. The next question is Ron Weasley a good son? About 68% of us said yes, about 20% said no, and about 13% said don't know. What did you think about this? Was there something in the comments that stood out to you? Tell us everything.
A couple of the comments touched on how Ron is ungrateful, begrudging. One mentioned how he complained about his mother's handmade sweater. And to that, I'm like, who of us as a kid, who of us fully
Who?
respected and understood the weight and gravity and lengths of our parents' sacrifice for us and the things that they did for us? What kid would like a handmade sweater over the fancy name brand sweater that all the cool girls are wearing at school? Like, I would have been like, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm making a very cringy face that y'all can't see. I think again, and I hate that this is, I don't mean it to be a crutch, but it's typical adolescent behavior. However, one comment said he only cares about his parents with regard to how they can serve him. And I think on its face, that's a very natural way for kids to behave. Your parents are there to serve you. That's how you see them. That's what they do. And you don't have that perspective until you're an adult and can look back. However, and I'm going to be so annoying about this Horcrux hunt, but what people tend to forget is that the catalyst for Ron leaving Harry and Hermione was they overheard a group of Muggleborns and Griphook talking about how Ginny was punished at school for trying to get Gryffindor's sword, and how, one of them says the Weasleys don't need another kid injured. And Ron loses his mind. This is what sends him into the spiral. And you see him talking with Harry, and he's like saying, what about the rest of my family? Are you not bothered by what that meant? And Hermione's like, we don't know that something bad is going to happen. We don't know that they're not going to be okay. And Ron says the most vicious thing. He's like, oh, you're sure? Right then, I won't bother myself about them. But it's all right for you two because your parents are safely out of the way. Which, like, that's when you're hurt and you throw that you dig that dagger in because of your own
Yeah,
hurt.
yeah, yeah.
Horrible, horrible thing for him to say. To which Harry goes, my parents are dead. And Ron retorts, and mine could be going the same way. And then Harry says, then go. And the fact that this was the catalyst for him to leave Harry and Hermione seems to just kind of be completely forgotten. I forgot about it too. And I don't know how you can say he doesn't care about his family when it came down to that moment. He was like, I have to be there for them. I can't lose them. Harry, you're fine. You've got Hermione, whatever. I got to go. Can't do anything. But he's like, I got to go be there for them right now, impulsively. So yes, I think he's a good son. He acts like any other son, but when it like comes down to brass tacks, he's again going to throw his life on the line or do whatever it takes, even if it's impulsive and ill-advised, to go be there for them. Try to edit that down. Whew, I'm sorry.
I won't. We're going to keep the whole thing in. Someone wrote, I would argue that Ron embodies the values instilled in him by his parents, making him a perfectly good son. He is, after all, and in spite of all of his insecurities, a loyal friend and channels their teachings of kindness, compassion, and inclusivity. The Weasley family is, despite the financial struggles, always a welcoming family, as shown with Remus, Tonks, and especially Harry. Ron is clearly his mother's son, even if the relationship that the two share is not perfect.
Love
And I
that.
think that it's amazing because I think that so much of the way that we think of whether a person is a good son or a good child is based on the way that they treat their parents,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the way that they embody the lessons of their parents. I think what this passage points to is the fact that, yes, his relationship with Molly may be strained, but in his behavior, he embodies so much of the way that he was raised in really beautiful and important ways in spite of his insecurities and in spite of the way that his family has made him feel. And I think that we would be disingenuous to not acknowledge the fact that so much of what he brings to bear in his more positive moments is the byproduct
Mm-hmm.
of what he was taught by Molly and Arthur.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. 10-10, no notes.
The next question is Ronald Weasley a good brother? This is where things get a little bit dicey. Everything has been fairly positive, but this one, Um, about 46% said yes, about 40% said no, and about 14% said don't know. I'm just going to go straight to what someone said. Someone wrote, I think Harry's point of view is quite limiting in exploring the siblings' different dynamics. Even if we share some time with all of these characters, most of what we see relates to Ron's insecurities and struggles while comparing himself to his older brothers, or even Ginny, because of her prowess in Quidditch and romance. But then I remembered that Ron is ultimately the only sibling that Percy reaches out to when he's estranged from the family. Even if Ron's not happy with his brother in this occasion, it shows that they clearly share a bond. I also thought of when Ron's protective instincts come to the forefront when Ginny is in danger in the Chamber of Secrets, ultimately helping save her life. He never doubts in asking Charlie for help with Hagrid's dragon and talks about his siblings with admiration and love in a way that only a good brother could. Y'all were really, really in your bag when it came to these responses because I think
Man.
it just brings out these moments that I think we forget because, again, movie Ron doesn't do this.
Mm-mm.
And so there are so many other moments where his behavior kind of clouds the beautiful moments like the ones mentioned in this
Yeah.
passage. And so I really do think that this captures a lot of what we do understand of who Ron is as a person. And I think it taps in directly to what we saw in the last passage about whether he was a good son, right? Really bringing to bear the things that he has learned from his parents and seen from his other siblings. And it's in these kind of little kind of cracks and crevices of these relationships that we really get to see Ron be a good brother. And I love this. I
Yeah.
love it.
I love that response as well. I'm glad you brought that one up. I think no matter what jealousy Ron holds, and we've said this with regards to the other questions, he's going to show up at the end of the day. And he does speak so highly of his brothers. Maybe not Percy so much, but Percy kind of, uh, he kind of asks for it sometimes. But um, he he loves them, and I just don't think that's a question. But it but and it's in spite of, not in spite of, but it's even in the midst of the conflict he feels internally about how much he loves his brothers and his sister, but how they all overshadow him. Like I feel like I can relate it to like when you're maybe in like your 20s and all your friends start getting engaged and you're like, I'm so happy for you. And you are, but then you go to the bathroom and cry a little because you're still so sad and alone. Like, I don't know if other people have experienced this, but I remember those moments in my 20s where I was like, I'm so happy for you. I love you so much. But internally it hurt. And I think that's what he's holding a lot of the time.
What is also true for Ron, and this also came up a lot in the responses, is that he is constantly compared to them. And so
Constantly
it's
by
not as if
everyone.
literally, and so it's not even as if he is just like having these thoughts because, oh, like I'm insecure. It's also the fact that literally everyone is comparing him to them. So it's not only internal, right? Like he's getting external feedback
Mm-hmm.
and being constantly reminded. And someone wrote, and I can't remember if this week or whenever, but like someone wrote, like the Weasley family is kind of like the Hunger Games. Like may the odds be ever in your favor in terms of getting attention, in terms of all of these things. And I think Ron bears the brunt of it because, he's one of 6 boys and that's just a lot. There's a lot to live up to and a lot of comparison and a lot of people to compare yourself to in ways that suggest that you'll never be good enough because even if you do good in this one thing, well, this other brother did a thing there. And so I think that like the fact that in the midst of all of that, he's able to find a desire to, say, hey, Charlie will absolutely help. Or, hey, we've got to go get Ginny. It doesn't matter what. Do you think you figured out how to do it? I think that like that is so telling about who he is as a person. And I think that this kind of passage really captured a lot of this
Mm-hmm.
dynamic because I do think that what is true for Ron is that a lot of the more negative moments where his insecurities really shine through are the ones that stick out to us and not so much these moments like being 12 years old and being like, let's go down into the Chamber of Secrets where we don't know what's
Mm-hmm.
there, but we know it's a monster, but we have to get my sister.
Like holding Gilderoy Lockhart at wand point, like
At 12.
at 12.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So now is the moment where Dani and I are going to reflect on what we've talked about thus far and then thinking about our own kind of relationships with Ron. And so this episode, we're going to just kind of cast a question out for you all to think about while we reflect. And so that question is, why do we extend less grace to Ron than Harry and Hermione? Dani, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. There was one comment that really stood out to me with regards to this question. They said Hermione and Harry, whose issues are either self stated or inferred. Given Ron's role in the trio, Ron gets to have actual deep flaws. His prejudices, his deep misconceptions about Harry and Hermione's relationship, his thoughts about women in general, because his function is less rigid than Harry's, who's the hero, and Hermione's, whose defining function is to provide knowledge and logic. Ron is, quote, the friend. So his friendships are the ones who are tested and explored the most. He gets to be disloyal because if Harry or Hermione were, the narrative structure would fall apart. I think that goes back to what you kept saying is he's too normal for us to forgive. And for me, it's he's so normal. I understand how to forgive him. I really just think it keeps going back to that. Like Hermione and Harry have such clear roles, and Ron is the structure between them. Like we see when he leaves on the Horcrux hunt, Harry and Hermione are like fraught. They're still friends, but he tells Ron, Hermione didn't talk. We said there was days we never even talked to each other while you were gone. He's really the glue, and that's just not as flashy. We, I think, as people and as a society, really strive for these accolades or these markers of success, whether it's popularity, money, success at work, straight A's, being the hero, or having sports acumen. We don't lay in bed at night and fantasize about, I want to be such a good friend. If my friends need me, I'm gonna be there. Like, there are things that we want, but it's far more passive in like decisions we make in the moment. It's not something we're trained and formed to aspire to as a culture and as a people. And so what he is so stinking normal. And I think because he isn't flashy in these ways, we don't forgive him as much. On the flip side, we can see Hermione and Harry act in really vicious ways, where Harry bellows, yells, shouts, explodes. Like, these are the verbs that are used in the book at Harry or Hermione and Ron. And we get it because he's under such immense pressure and he's so traumatized. And then Hermione can be manipulative and dismiss his fears and feelings and can show this like coldness towards other people's struggles if she doesn't understand them, like Aluna or Lavender when her rabbit dies. Like, there's things like that where Hermione's just very deeply unlikable, but she's so smart and saves the day. And she sacrifices a lot to be so smart and save the day. So we're going to more easily forget and forgive that she actually can be very mean.
So much of what you said resonates with me. And I think that someone wrote in one of their comments, in Harry's story, Hermione is the head and Ron is the heart. And I think that, and I would add to that, that like Harry is the brawn, like he's the
Yes,
enforcer,
I
right?
think that's exactly it.
What feels true about Ron in terms of thinking about why we extend less grace to him is because Ron is so normal that like we don't necessarily feel as compelled to see him as like a victim. And one thing that is true for this fandom is that we love forgiving even the worst behavior if there's even a hint of a victim narrative that we can like grasp onto.
Yep.
See Draco, see Sirius, see Hagrid, see
Yep.
like
Mm-hmm.
see, right?
On it, everyone but Ron, essentially.
Literally, right? And so, again, we have Harry who has been marked for death since he was 1 years old. And we have Hermione who is a muggle born girl who's new to this place and just trying to make her way through. And so we can really make narratives about why we should forgive them for their worst actions, why it's okay that Hermione put Rita Skeeter in a jar as a bug and basically
I
cursed his
forgot
future.
about that.
And like, that's cool. And that we can acknowledge it and say, oh, well, she was a child, or oh, Rita was so mean to her, or oh, she's a muggle born. And so it's really difficult for we make lots of excuses. We do similar things for Harry because again of the pressure and the abuse and the trauma and the
Mm-hmm.
Ron doesn't have all of that in his narrative, at least not in to the same extent.
It's not as explicit.
It isn't, and it feels so normal. It's like, "Oh, like, your family doesn't have a lot of money, boo-hoo," and, "Oh, like, you're insecure, who isn't?" Right? And so, we
Yep.
don't use those things or we don't allow those things to be excuses for his bad behavior because
Mm-hmm.
we're like, it's not like, you aren't in the same league of victimhood as your friends or
Yeah.
these other people in your orbit. Do you have the right to be able to be upset about your lot in life? You're pure blood. Like, do you get to be mad? And there are parts of that that really resonate with me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I think there are questions there that I have to grapple with when it comes to Ron. But I do think that there is something about how normal he is relative to pretty much literally everyone else. Um, that I I personally think it triggers something in each of us. There are parts of Ron that are very much parts of us. And but when we read fantasy, when we read fiction, we're trying to escape that reality. We're trying to escape normal. We're trying to find a place where we can aspire to be something more, where we can be the brightest witch of our age, or we can be the chosen one savior person. And Ron does not give us the opportunity to have something that is beyond us to aspire to. Like, yes, like to your again, like you said, like we could all aspire to want to be a good friend, but like that's not on the top of our list. No, I want to defeat Voldemort. I want to be 12 years old and do one of the hardest potions, right? Like I want to be those people. And Ron presents to us normal and real.
I think he gives us a little bit of a harsh look in the mirror.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have to be exceptional to be forgivable? Do you have to
Ooh.
overextend yourself and rise above and beyond and be that super high functioning person to have your faults or your failings feel warranted? I think he really challenges our ability for empathy in a big way.
Absolutely. And I think that part of our big issue with Ron is that we have been taught that you only give sympathy to the people that you believe deserve it. And normal issues and problems do not warrant the same level of empathy and sympathy and understanding. And and
Yeah.
so what it does is it really invalidates our own experiences. And I think that that is in large part due to the fact that society tells us, like, well, you aren't entitled to that because you
Mhm.
don't deserve to feel forgiven for a basic mistake. And again, like all of Ron's mistakes are not small, but I do think that, one of the things that I kept as I was
Mhm.
reading through the comments, I kept saying aloud was like, I kept thinking it back to the Percy episode. And I kept saying to myself, like, some people were very forgiving and understanding. And I kept being like, we got to keep that same energy. And I think that it,
As an aside, the Percy episode helped me see Percy in a new light because I was a Percy hater. Like, ugh.
me
He's
too.
one of the people that I'm like, oh, we gave him a little bit of a redemption over this, you know, any other character.
Yeah.
And that episode really opened my eyes. So,
Oh, I'm glad. It opened
yeah.
mine too. It really did. And this episode right now, I'm like, okay, Ron, I see you. I see you. But I think I do think that there's something just about the genre in general. Like it's rare that you get a regular character who is very much
Mhm.
like you in the world you're trying to escape by reading the book you're reading or watching the
Yeah.
movie that you're watching. And I think Ron really invites us to think about what are the normal things in our lives that we aren't giving ourselves or others grace for?
Oof. Oh, who knew this was going to turn into therapy?
I'm gonna leave that question there because I have to
Yeah.
grapple with it. But I do think that that's what Ron like. There are lots of normal things in our lives that we just are really down on ourselves about, and I just wonder, like,
Mhm.
what are those things, and to what extent
Were
can we kind of think about being more gracious to ourselves for?
Yeah, I really liken it to, like, the gifted kid syndrome, where a lot of us millennials were told we were gonna be so great, we could accomplish anything we put our mind to, and sure, some people did, but then a lot of us are just, like, working our 9 to 5s, we're part of the grind, we aren't, the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, the founders, the celebrities, we're just people. And we're like, "Oh, I thought I was gonna be greater than this. I'm just
Mm.
normal." And Ron is just normal. Well, so like I said, it's a harsh look in the mirror. We're like, "Oh,
And it
ew."
and it really shines a light on how much the world around us, like, highlights the exceptional and minimizes.
Yeah. What it
Yeah.
takes to get through the day. It's like when people compare pain. Like, you are in pain, something bad has happened to you, but, like, others have it worse. And I think that's true, and that's something in general to keep in mind,
Mhm.
but people use that mindset as an excuse to dismiss their own or others' pain as something that shouldn't be taken seriously. And I think that's what we're kinda getting at with Ron. He doesn't have a maniac after him. He isn't part of an oppressed class of
Yeah.
Muggleborns, but he grew up in poverty. He's been dismissed. All the things we've said about him that cause deep-seated pain. The one thing that, like, it all boils down to for me with regards to why don't we, ascribe much grace to him as we do the others, and we've danced around it, but I think it boils down to no one wants to project themselves onto Ron. We want to read and project ourselves onto Harry. We want to read and project ourselves onto Hermione. Who wants to do that with Ron? Really? Not even me. I'm his biggest fan, and I don't want to read it as him.
Yeah, and I think that that idea touches on the, why is it that we go into this world in general?
Mm,
What is it that we're hoping to find, and what is it that we're hoping to find for ourselves in these places? And to what extent are the people that we project ourselves onto a reflection of that desire to be exceptional, to be more? And what does that then mean for how
mm.
we look at the people who don't fall into those categories? This has been an episode of Critical Magic Theory. We did it. We did it. Thank you so much to everyone who
We did
listened. Thank
it.
you so much to Dani for joining us today. Dani, where can we find you on the internets?
I'm on the internet. I live in my computer. I am on TikTok as Holding Yoki, and I am on Instagram as Dani.reads.things. And that is where you'll find me screaming about fan fiction, books, the Hot Ron agenda, all of the above.
Follow her, y'all. Okay? Follow her because it's so much fun. And for those of us who are fanfic readers, the suggestions don't miss. And
Thank
so
you.
I'm so happy to have you join me today to talk about Ron. This was so, so, so much fun.
Should we say part 2 is coming
Part
next
two
week?
is coming, okay? We're actually about to record it, so you just get ready. Part two is coming. That will come next week. You're just getting a lot of critical magic theory. I know that you're excited. And so we're looking forward to that as well. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Ginny Weasley. Get ready, get excited. The Ginny Weasley survey is in the episode summary. This has been another episode of Critical Magic Theory. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, first off, thank you. Please feel free to rate, like, subscribe, follow. If you're on Spotify, you can actually make a comment about the episode. I love that. I love reading them. I love hearing what you all think. So please feel free to do that. If you want to continue this conversation, please feel free to follow me on TikTok at ProfW, PROFW, on Instagram at prof.jw, or on YouTube. And if you want to send me an email, please email me at criticalmagictheory@gmail.com. Get excited for part 2 of our Ron episode next week. Until then, be critical and stay magical, my friends. Bye.